This episode is dedicated to Jacob Reeves, Ian Joseph Wolfgang Riley Peterson, Harry Lencio Rios, and Jason S. for becoming our newest Southpaw supporters and helping to make this project possible. The Southpaw podcast and project is supported entirely by listeners like you. If you want to support the work that we do, please leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen. Share these episodes, follow us on social media. If you're a new listener, make sure to click subscribe. And if you really want to support this project, then become a paid monthly subscriber on patreon.com/southpawpod. If you head over to Patreon and subscribe for just $4 a month, you will get immediate access to our complete catalog of bonus episodes, videos, and articles. The more supporters we have, the more time we can dedicate to the show, which means more bonuses, such as classic fight commentary, transcripts of interviews, building a liberation martial arts online curriculum, and most important of all, hire and pay for staff. If you can't support us monthly, you can also do one-time donations at ko-fi.com/southpawpod. We also have t-shirts and sweatshirts to not only flex the show, but your own moral compass. By supporting us, you're not only helping us grow, you're also helping us stay and keep this project running. We can't exist without your support. Thank you.
Before we kick off today's fight study, let me give a shout out to our own Paul, or Southpaw as we call him in the chat, who recently got married. This is why you haven't heard much from him lately, as planning a wedding is a lot. So congrats to Paul and spouse. I'm not going to state her name because I know Paul likes to keep things low key. This is also why he doesn't want to create his own social media accounts, and I don't blame him. But I think I speak for everyone when I say I wish them a long marriage based around MMA, anime, and K-pop. Now moving ahead.
All right.
This is Sam.
This is Todd.
This is Jason.
And this is Fight Study.
Let's introduce today's panel. We've brought back boxing, wrestling, and MMA coach Jason Sargus. Hi, Jason.
How you doing, Sam?
And we've brought on BJJ coach and judoka Todd Levin. Welcome, Todd.
Thanks for having me, Sam.
So Todd is new to the panel, but not new to Southpaw, as he's one of the very early listeners, possibly one of the original 5. He's also how I got Dr. David Vine on the show. I'd say majority of the guests have come by way of introduction from the Southpaw community. So though we are a small community, we are mighty. Now let's talk about UFC 264, Poirier versus McGregor 3. Starting with the main event, Dustin Poirier versus Conor McGregor. So to give a backdrop, they first fought as featherweight prospects. McGregor won the first time by KO in the first round, but they went on 2 different paths as McGregor reached his peak very quickly and very early in his career, whereas Poirier hit his peak closer to the MMA average, which is later than other sports, much closer to 30. For heavyweights, it's even later than that. In the second fight, which happened earlier this year, this time at 155, it was Poirier who won by KO in the second round. Narrative of that fight was that McGregor didn't know how to check leg kicks. Part 3 also ended in the first round, this time by doctor stoppage due to McGregor's ankle being broken. But Poirier was close to ending that fight in the first round anyway. Todd, what were your expectations going into the fight, and how did it play out compared to your expectations?
My expectations going into the fight, people were asking me, what do you think is going to happen? I thought Dustin was going to get probably a 3rd round TKO, maybe from ground and pound. I don't think anybody saw a broken, I guess it was a tibia. He broke his tibia right at the end of the first round there. I don't think anybody guessed that was going to happen. But, these things kind of happen in MMA. From the second fight, there was that, that boxing stance. He was going to fight a boxer. Either way, the boxing stance didn't really do so well. So everybody thought he was going to go back to karate stance Conor, which he did for a little bit, but also he had a kind of tighter stance that I saw. And, the first 10 seconds, I think he threw a couple spinning back kicks. So that was kind of surprising. He kind of thought the old Conor is back. But once they got into the rhythm of things, Dustin really handled the pressure well. And he got a takedown while Conor got that little guillotine. And, everybody was screaming, but, from the angle that I saw it at, Dustin was controlling with his right hand Conor's left arm. So he didn't really get a good tight guillotine. And then the camera switched and you saw, his hands weren't even connected. So once they kind of were in a decent position on the ground, Conor was getting some elbows at Dustin's head, which didn't look too good. But Poirier had a good ground and pound from the top, and it really didn't look good for Conor going into towards the end of the round. And eventually Conor got up, and they were exchanging some punches, and then Conor falls back, and I knew something was wrong. And then I looked down, and his foot was really messed up.
Did you think initially he was dropped by a punch, or you knew right away it wasn't the punch?
I just thought, something happened to his foot. I immediately thought it was his left leg. So when he sat down, he kind of couldn't step back on his leg. So he just sat back against the cage, and I knew something was up with his leg. And then, of course, they showed the camera on it, and it was pretty gruesome.
Jason, what did you think Bolt needed to do to win going into this fight compared to the actual game plan and execution you ended up seeing?
I think the appropriate approach would have been to attack the body. And Conor did initially. A couple spinning back kicks, a couple straight kicks to the body.
Why do you say that would be the appropriate thing to do, to attack the body?
Because if you watch Poirier's defense, and he has very educated boxing defense, he's really good. He does sort of a shoulder roll with a high elbow guard. Not dissimilar to the Philly shell, but the Philly shell where the lower arm or the lead arm wraps around the belly. So with that high guard, with that high elbow, the body's sort of exposed. And when they first fought, when they fought the second time, Poirier was doing a great job of punching in between Conor's punches, intercepting strikes, or slip and returns, like delayed counter punching. And Conor was headhunting the entire time. And as he missed, Poirier made him pay. So I think with that kind of educated defense, and it's top heavy with that high guard and the shoulder rolls, he is susceptible to the body a little bit.
Do you notice how his back is really erect? It's like a perfect back if you're going to do a deadlift or a squat, right? You want this really erect spine and your chest puffed out. So he has this really straight back, which kind of, to your point then, sticks his stomach out for body shots. Yeah,
his stance and his movement is, if I were watching him, I wouldn't say, and I'd be wrong, right? I wouldn't say he's next level physically gifted. But he is. He has intangibles like vision and presence inside the pocket, and the ability to time counters, simultaneous counters, delayed counters. He's also good at fighting on the lead, and vision and timing and reaction time, and also grit and composure under pressure that allows you to respond in real time while you're making some reads. He does that as well as anybody, but it doesn't look super smooth. It's not. I mean, his stance sometimes gets a little bit wonky whenever he does the shift, but it works for him. And if you watch closely, his ability to punch in between Conor's punches, and basically everyone he's been competing against in the last few years, is something that he didn't have in that first Conor McGregor fight. Earlier in his career, if you go back to even the documentary on him, he would swing, and then the other guy would swing. They would have this gentleman's agreement to go back and forth like a goddamn ping pong match. But now he's seeing things, and he's punching in between punches. And when the other guy gets a little bit wild or wants to go too big, he notices that load up, that change and shift of the shoulders and hips, and he'll lower his level and he'll take you down, and he'll score a cheap and easy one. If he gets on top, he's a heavy guy from that top position. And he recognizes ground and pound as well as anybody. So that's why I would have established some body work, knowing it's a 5-round fight. Wanting to, you got 5 rounds to work, so you start to invest in some of that stuff early instead. And I would have worked the legs as well. But I think where Conor sort of got off track, he started with a good game plan. He didn't overextend on that left hand like he usually does, and certainly did in the first fight. And he does that against southpaws constantly. He overreaches, overextends, and he gets blasted with right hooks. And the Poirier 2.0 is going to make you pay if you lead face first. And Conor didn't do that right off the bat. He actually did a good job of disguising some of his shots. But then he started to fight Poirier like Poirier wasn't world class. He just started whipping kicks one after another, like he's a bully. Well, I got news for you. You're not going to fucking bully Poirier. It's not going to happen. I don't care who you are. I don't care how many millions of dollars you're worth because of how much whiskey you sold. You're not going to bully the guy, and no chance. He's too grizzled. He's been around too long, and he's not going anywhere. So, starting to feel yourself a little bit from the success he had in the first minute. I think it cost him, because if you watch, like by the 3rd minute of the fight, I think at 3 minutes and 36 seconds or something, Conor starts to load up on that left hand again, and he shows it, and you see, and they're both southpaws. I said it earlier, McGregor doesn't do exceptionally well against southpaws. He starts loading up on his left hand, and you see Poirier time his own counter left that simultaneously splits McGregor's. And McGregor can eat a punch, but psychologically, I think it wears on him more than it does physically. And after 3 minutes, Conor was content to go for a guillotine, when normally you would think that he would want to keep that fight standing as much as possible. So I think Conor started with the right game plan, but Poirier did what he does. He finds openings. He makes some reads. He has educated defense, which is incredibly underrated, and may have been the only goddamn fighter on the entire card to have any whatsoever. It was the most defensively, striking wise, the most defensively negligent card I've seen in a long time.
We'll get into that, because there's some fights that I want to talk about where it was just like, where's the defense?
Right.
One thing that I noticed about Poirier, not even in this fight, in a lot of his fights, and I don't even necessarily know if it's a bad thing, but he has this twitch where he constantly messes with his pants. Like if you ever watch Taekwondo fighters, they're always fidgeting with their pants. And just like in Taekwondo, it's not necessarily a bad thing, because sometimes you use it to fake people, like, come attack me while I'm messing with my pants. And then this is when I'm going to hit you back or counter you. I couldn't tell if it was hurting him or not, but it definitely is something that he always does. And I think it's just a twitch that he can't get rid of, but maybe he uses it to draw people in because he can't get rid of it anyway. Did you notice that, Jason?
Yeah, I noticed. I pick up a lot of these things from fighters, and I think it's subconscious. I don't think it's intentional. I used to watch Nate Carr, a 3-time national champ, and I always coach when I was wrestling at West Virginia, and he would just touch his nose for seemingly no reason, and he would hit the sweetest duck under to a cross body lock that I've ever seen. And it's coming because he touches his nose, and then something explosive is coming behind it, but it didn't matter. He was just too fast. He was too powerful, too explosive. And it might be something like, some guys have a hitch in their jab, which is technically incorrect, but they feel more comfortable with their own timing if they're allowed a little hitch. Some guys with ridiculous hand speed, in Major League Baseball. Same thing. They like preload it and then go. And you know that that's not correct, but it works for them. So maybe it helps adjust his timing, or it's a comfort thing. But I think at this point it's self-conscious, or it's subconscious. Excuse me.
Good point. And it's not always something that hurts the fighters. I know, like Dominic Cruz has this weird twitch where he'll back up to kind of like recenter himself mentally, and he'll kind of like pump his shoulders and take these giant breaths while he's pumping his shoulders. And then he finds himself in the fight again. And I wonder if that's something also like Dustin does to kind of like reset himself.
Well, I think the breathing is probably somewhat intentional. That eventually becomes habituated when you do it long enough. So though it has a purpose, it sort of becomes habituated into a bit of a tick. You got to be careful. Sometimes things can be a tell. I think later in the career of Clay Guida, all he did was play with his hair. He kept fixing his hair, and then people would just start blasting him while his hands are tied up in what is now like a bit of a receding mane, but it was quite the head of hair back in the day. And with his like constant movement, it was just always all over the place.
I think people figure that out with Donald Cowboy Cerrone too, the way he sways his hands. And then once his hand stops swaying, the punches are coming.
Oh, yeah. Well, Nico Price has a little tick when he shuffles left and right to cut the ring off, which he does very well with his footwork. But while he does it, he rocks his hands a little bit lower and then right back up, and a little bit lower and right back up. And when guys do that, because we're bipeds, right? When we move, we tend to counterbalance our arms with a swaying motion. It helps us be a little bit more mobile and balanced. So it's tough to get rid of that. And it's a trade-off. You have a little more mobility when you do that. But, and I know this is jumping to another fight, but Pereira shuffled with him, and then just would go as he caught him rolling his hands a little bit lower on that movement. So you can time some of that stuff. And I think the more astute fighters who have that kind of visual acuity, they find those. And if they have the athleticism and the fast twitch muscle fiber to back it up, you see some pretty cool stuff sometimes.
Now let's talk about the ankle break, or as Todd mentioned, maybe it's the tibia break. But in searching through the fight, which isn't actually that long, there's two moments where it looked like it got really damaged. One was where Dustin checked a kick and points at Conor's leg to say something happened. And I posted that online on slow-mo so you could see it. And also a point where Conor throws a front kick, and talking about the elbow position that Jason was mentioning, he dropped that elbow down. So it's basically 12-6. And that's how he blocked the front kick. So the front kick just hit the tip of Poirier's elbow. And then the torque of the punch, going back to what Jason was talking about, where he was overextending at that point, and it was just so much torque. Maybe that was the final thing, and then the leg just gave out.
Agreed. It possibly could have been an accumulation, right? Or it could have been an acute injury in the moment. But I more often than not, I would imagine that it's in that fight. If you watch how many kicks, would we see how many spinning back kicks right off the bat, and then he would throw a huge kick, a huge left kick, low roundhouse, and then he would follow it up with a teep. And so he kept going, and he kept going to it as if, and yeah, the tib fib breaks are pretty rare, but they're happening a little bit more, and to act like they're a freak occurrence as opposed to just a rare occurrence is a little disingenuous. I think you need to be a little more observant. It's happening more and more often.
I know some people on Twitter pointed out that once calf kicks started getting popular, for a while, nobody was stopping it. And then in the last, I think starting from January, people started noticing as people were checking the calf kicks in other organizations, like more leg breaks were happening, and including in the UFC where we saw some leg breaks as well. So,
well, it also has to do with the style of kick. You're not turning over that calf kick. the same way you're turning over like a kick that's higher on the thigh.
Yeah.
So when you do it and you do it at distance, and yes, it's your longest limb, kicking at their closest limb, but if it does get checked, you're leading with the part of the shin that can't take as much force, and it becomes a fulcrum. And Connor kicks hard. He's pretty thick in the legs, and he rotates hard. And if you're not kicking, I don't want to say correctly, because that's not the right word choice. But if you're kicking with that kind of bad intent, and you catch it on like the stronger part of just below the knee, right, or even the kneecap itself, it's going to hurt both people. But you're starting to see it more and more often. Even high level kickboxers. Anderson Silva was very high level. Spong, very high level. Hell, didn't Ray Sefo bust his leg up kicking? These are guys who have been doing it a long time. So it isn't some kid off the soccer field decides to take MMA, all of a sudden starts winging kicks at some other guy's knee, and shit just starts exploding. You're talking about guys who have some experience in the striking game, especially with a kick-heavy arsenal, and it's happening to them. So, placement, a little more strategy instead of just piss and vinegar and like go, go, go. And that was my problem with Connor's game plan, is that he was having some success, and then he fought like a bully against a guy who has exceptional counter striking and is a notoriously difficult out at 155 pounds. And again, you're not going to fucking bully Poirier. You're just not going to do it.
One thing that surprised me was this McGregor looked a lot worse than the McGregor who fought Chad Mendes in 2015. It's not just that he's not keeping up, but much like Joe Rogan's commentary, he's actually getting worse. So to the point about the way he's even throwing the kicks, back in the day, he used to place his kicks. Like he would aim and try to hit that target. And I remember in The Ultimate Fighter, he always kept drilling his team that they shouldn't just punch or kick blindly. They should aim where exactly they wanted to land on the body and then try to be precise. His whole thing, remember he had all those like speeches about precision?
Yeah.
And now this current Connor, the precision is gone. Like you said, he just tries to bully. So even when he was throwing the kicks, he was kicking majority of the time with that same leg that ended up getting injured. He was just spamming with that side, every different kind of kick, and not really caring where it landed. He was just going to throw it like it's a blunt object. So it all kind of checks and it all makes sense. And, who knows what will happen to Connor from here. But first glance reactions. How do y'all see Charles Oliveira versus Dustin Poirier going? Let's start with you, Todd.
I think Oliveira is either a second or third degree black belt. So he's been a black belt for quite a while. So I'm not exactly sure. That would be a really interesting matchup on the ground. Striking wise, you can see Oliveira is, he's getting better, getting more comfortable. As long as he can close the distance and get against the cage, I think he will take Dustin down, get a good ground and pound, probably get to a position that he wants. And, knowing him, he would probably want to take the back and finish with a rear naked choke. But, it would be really interesting to see Dustin, seeing how he defends Oliveira's grappling. That would be a really fun fight.
I can't imagine that fight not being good just because of the way their styles match up. What do you think about this fight, Jason? Just first glance reactions. I'm sure later on when you study it more, you'll have different opinions.
Oh, it gives me chills just thinking about it. Like I said, Poirier is so ridiculously tough. And I love the evolution of Charles Oliveira. And he just keeps getting better. His wrestling is improving, his striking is improving, and his jiu-jitsu is just off the charts good. Both the guys have a tendency to get hit, but yet it's how you get hit, right? Pocket presence means a lot. I think the most pocket present, the fighter in the UFC with most pocket presence just retired. That's Felder. Everyone talks about his chin. His chin's fantastic. but it's also the fact that he is in there and he is poised and calm and comfortable, not flinching, and he sees the punches coming, and slight rolling of the shoulder, slight rolling of the chin and neck. Put yourself in a better ability to absorb a blow as opposed to just eat all that energy. So you're watching these guys, though they get hit, because both are very offensive, striking wise. Their ability to absorb some punishment has to do with their composure in the pocket. It's an aspect of defense I don't think is really noted or picked up on, at least by the casuals who just want to see blood and just bleed bullshit. So that ties in to the grit that you see from Poirier. He's always in your face. Fighters like Poirier, like Felder, like the Diaz brothers, their conditioning and their composure allows them to be present, and that it really does go a long way. And that's what I think, where I think the advantage would lie in that fight. I think tools wise and skills wise, if you're going to design a fighter, I like Charles Oliveira. But some of the intangibles, I'd put money on Poirier.
Next, we have the welterweight fight between Gilbert Burns and Stephen Thompson. Though Burns won by unanimous decision, according to the cards, it was 1 round apiece going into the third. Then Burns ran away with it. Jason, what did you think about this fight?
Am I the only one that saw the GIF of, or it's GIF, right? The GIF of Burns punching himself in the face?
I noticed it during the moment.
So speaking on that, he went so wild at times that he actually hit himself once in the face, and it looks like he dropped himself, but I think he was a little off balance anyway. All joking aside, that kind of offense where he doubled up and tripled up, even though it was wild, because he is such a heavy hitter, he is strong, and he can fight at that pace for a while. He caused some problems on the secondary and tertiary, just wild offense that he put on Wonder Boy. And Wonder Boy is great at avoiding it first time, every time. You're not going to hit him with your first technique. But swinging, hook, jab, straight, or jab, wild overhand. And he just kept that forward pressure. And he was able to get to Thompson's hips, and his striking, as wild as it was, and sometimes as ludicrous as it looked, was the only reason he had the success on his takedowns. That in an ever-improving wrestling game from someone who is, I don't know how old Burns is, but he's been around a while. He's been in a jiu-jitsu force. Everyone knows that. But I was sleeping on his wrestling. I knew it was good and improving. I knew he was very physically strong. But when I watched him come in, he was hitting those penetration steps. He looked smoother and faster, and even like greater hip mobility than I think I had ever witnessed in his career. So I was wondering if Thompson's ability to manage distance was going to be, I thought it was going to be the deciding factor in this fight. And I would have put money on Wonder Boy, because no one could take him down because he manages distance so well. But that's because everyone's shooting like abysmal takedown attempts from a mile away. And Burns just he went, what is it, a Tasmanian devil, until he got close enough to those hips. And then you just see how physically strong he was. And he was able to get takedowns, 3 or 4, I think. And each time, I don't think he gave up that top position once he got him.
Todd, what did you think?
In the second round, I saw a lot of kicks from Wonder Boy to kind of keep range to get away from that takedown. But at the same time, there were a few times where Gilbert Burns, I'll just call him Durinho, he would put him close to the cage, and you'd see Wonder Boy peeking back to make sure, how close he is to the cage, where he's at in the cage, because I don't think he wanted to be there. If he's close to the cage and Durinho closes the distance, he's going to get a takedown. So, he was definitely afraid of that. In the opening round, I noticed Durinho had like a bit of a wider stance than he usually does. Maybe like trying to, get Wonder Boy had his own game, used a little more karate style. So I was wondering if that would, keep on to, towards the end of the fight. And, he closed it up a little bit, but, he was still using a wide stance throughout the whole fight. There was an interesting moment towards the end of the first round. Durinho had Wonder Boy up against the cage on the ground, and Wonder Boy was starting to get up, but he had his knee down on the ground, and Durinho was throwing some good knees to the body, but I think he was playing that game, not to get kneed in the head. And then Durinho saw that opening and just started punching the hell out of him in the face, and that forced Wonder Boy to stand right back up. So I thought that was a pretty interesting moment. I agree with you, Sam. I had it the first round for Durinho, the second round for Wonder Boy, and then the third round was definitely Durinho's round.
Todd, you know how good Gilbert Burns is on the ground. Being a jiu-jitsu person, you probably have trained long enough where you remember Gilbert Burns as a competitor. I think Gilbert Burns actually, didn't he just win the Worlds and then immediately after winning it went right into MMA?
Yes.
So with that said, were you surprised at all how Stephen Thompson was able to avoid not only preventing Durinho from getting better positions, but fight-ending positions?
Yeah, I think there's one thing with Durinho is he's good, taking your back and getting a good rear naked choke. And, a lot of people will train just keeping their back on the mat so you don't get your back taken, And also MMA is a different monster where you're eating shots, you're worried. If you're on the bottom, you're worried about eating shots and also trying to get up. And if you're on top, it's kind of you have to play a middle ground with keeping pressure or taking off pressure and, getting a good ground and pound. So, definitely Woodley or Wonder Boy doesn't have as good of a jiu-jitsu pedigree as Durinho, but his jiu-jitsu is defensive enough to avoid getting into super bad positions, and a lot of the grappling happened against the cage, so it was also hard for Durinho to kind of get to a better position. There were a few times Wonder Boy's back was up against the cage and he was kind of like sitting against the cage, and you saw Durinho trying to pull his hands from under him to get him back flat on the canvas. But I think right at the end of the third round, Durinho got a good takedown into side control, and he had a little bit of a guillotine attempt. Not exactly sure what happened. Maybe Wonder Boy kind of came up a little bit, but he was trying to go for a guillotine and got a mount position from that.
Just from the threat.
Exactly. So Wonder Boy knew what was up. He didn't want to be there. So, I'd rather get mounted than get choked out. And the fight ends there.
The other thing about Wonder Boy's family is that he's not just married into Chris Weidman's family, but he's also married into Carlos Machado's family. So that type of like defensive jiu-jitsu is something that he's been working on for a long time.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've grappled with high-level MMA fighters, and they're technically blue belts, but their defense is on a brown or black belt level just because they've been there before and they've rolled with high-level guys, and plus if I'm trying to ground and pound, they're right up back on their feet. So it's a different game. If I'm doing competition style jiu-jitsu, I could hold them down, but I'm not scoring points with the ground and pound. So the second I take off a little pressure, they're going to stand right back up. So as training MMA, you have to find that middle ground, the good pressure on top and a good ground and pound, and training for that defensively against a guy like Durinho. Maybe it's a lot harder. And at the in the post-fight interview, Jorginho was saying, he was training with one guy, and the guy was just trying to defend takedowns the whole time. So he probably got a lot of rounds in just trying to go for the takedown against a guy who doesn't want to get taken down. So that's why I think Jorginho had a lot of good takedowns against Wonder Boy that we're not used to seeing.
It definitely seems like Wonder Boy is a little slower than he used to be. Not like a lot, but just a hair, which means he can still hang in the top 10 for a while because he's just that good. But getting another shot at the belt seems less conceivable now. Next is the heavyweight fight between Tai Tuivasa versus Greg Hardy. Going back to what Jason was talking about as far as defensive irresponsibility, this is a good example. The fight lasted about a minute. Greg Hardy initially had the upper hand, beating Tuivasa to the punch and rocking him. Then he fucked up and got knocked out. Jason, what happened there?
I'll tell you what happened. Hardy likes to beat people up. He doesn't like to fight. He's a football player. He doesn't like to fight. He doesn't want to get in a fist fight. He doesn't want to dig deep. He doesn't want to fight anyone that's his physical equal. He doesn't. He avoid that shit like the plague. He wants to beat people up. There's a difference between fighters and people that want to beat people up. It's a different thing. People who want to beat people up, the second they get someone in there that's better than them, that they have to problem solve, they will lose. They won't do it. They're not there for that. Hardy's not there for that. He's always been the bigger, stronger, better athlete. So when a guy like Tuivasa comes in with tattoos on his love handles and says, fuck that, and he gets stung by Hardy right off the bat with a left. And Hardy's like, oh, yeah, like beating people up. He gets that hunger for violence until he gets a guy who's weighs every bit as much as he does and probably definitely has better technique on his punches and has some pop himself, because all heavyweights do for the most part. And he gets shut the fuck down. And hey, I mean, if you can't tell, I'm not a Greg Hardy fan.
I don't think any of us are.
I don't like him as a human being. We can get into that, and we can talk about my lack of forgiveness or anything like that. People get second chances. You show me some contrition, and we can have that discussion. Until then, I hope Tuivasa fights him every weekend and knocks him out every weekend. But I digress. It is the ability to punch, but not the ability to move out of the way of a punch or recognize the nuances of positioning and what's coming.
So you don't see it as a lucky punch by Tuivasa?
No, Tuivasa's a better striker. He's been in there. He knows how to kickbox. You have some serious physical gifts from Greg Hardy, a legitimate NFLer, all pro. Like, he's a stud physically. He really is. And he has the height. He looked like he came in great shape. I know Billy Padden was working with him. Billy Padden is over at American Top Team, and he's from Philly. They call him Billy from Philly. Great boxing coach. So I know you're going to teach this guy to have some hands. But you guys know this, right? There's guys who learn how to punch. They can look fantastic on the pads. But if 50% of striking is offense and the other 50% is defense, I just don't understand why there isn't a want to learn it. I get it that offense is what Dana White wants, but he can go fuck himself, right? You're in there with other heavyweights that hit hard. You'd be remiss to think that you can continue to headbutt punches from a person who's probably 300 pounds and still be standing. So, and I also get it that the visual acuity and the synaptic response, the neuromuscular junction, right? Your muscle memory from being able to in real time compute that there's stuff coming at you, like a fist or an elbow or a knee or a kick. But at the same time, these guys are so proud of their ability to punch that there's no real want to pursue the ability to duck, dodge, parry, slip, even a 6-inch drop step. which is a great setup for a counter right hand. They just don't seem to want it. And I guess it's because, hey, if you give me an NFLer who can spam right hands and Dana wants to sign him, I guess that's the most expedient route to getting a guy a contract. But it's also the most expedient route to getting the guy knocked the fuck out.
Todd, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I think Jason makes a really good point of, how to punch and know where you are positionally wise to be ready for the next step. And when Hardy got hit by that left, I think his hands were up in the air. His shoulders were nowhere near his face. He was swinging and banging, as they say. He wasn't really trying to, use good technique. He rocked him a little bit, but once he smelled blood, he was, he went so aggressive that he, all technique went out the door. His arms were flailing around, and the second he got hit, his hands were up in the air, and then from there, he finished with that ground and pound. It was very satisfying.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
And then finishes up with the shoey. So that was very entertaining from the opening bell until, Ty was out of the arena.
Yeah, Tuivasa keeps trying to get that to catch on, tries to get all of us to do the shoey. I don't think that's going to catch on.
No, not in the era of COVID. I think we'd be better served to avoid that.
Yeah. Next is Irene Aldana versus Yana Kunitskaya, which actually I really like this fight, and I'll get into that later. But this was a women's catchweight bout at 140 because Aldana missed weight. This was Aldana's second first-round KO by left hook. Of course, being MMA, there's more punches after that, but her left hook is becoming her signature punch. Todd, give us your thoughts about this fight.
Kunitskaya, she came in pretty aggressive. She didn't really seem to have very good rhythm, and you saw Aldana a little bit calculated, waiting for her moment. So, Kunitskaya was throwing, some spinning techniques, spinning back kicks, spinning back fists. And she was also trying to clinch, but Aldana got out of there pretty well. And Aldana was just, waiting for her moment, and eventually it came. And she got that nice little left hook and finished with the ground and pound. It was a very good performance by Irene Aldana. And, Yana just, it didn't seem like she caught her rhythm. If she got a few more connections with her strikes, slowed down a little bit, maybe she could have made the fight a little longer. But she was a little bit too aggressive, and that was her fate.
Jason, you mentioned this earlier about the lack of defense on this fight. And I think just like the previous fight we just talked about, this is another great example. Maybe not from both people, but there was a great amount of variety that came from Kunitskaya, but it was all offense. And I don't think she showed any defense. So what were your thoughts about this fight?
Well, Todd just said it. She got over aggressive, right? Kunitskaya fought Aldana like Aldana didn't know how to box. And it's obvious Kunitskaya has some tools, but she never got her head off center line when she came forward and everything ended up in like a muddy, ugly clinch situation when she did until Aldana started timing. Aldana can box. She got some hands, and she's another one. She has some pocket presence. So it's this spammy offense that has no why. Why are you doing that? What did you see that prompted you to do that? Because I'm watching it in like 0.8 speed or 0.75 speed, and I'm just blown away with how piss poor it is. And I hate to say that, and it's not specifically the Kunitskaya fight. Kunitskaya is a fighter that looks incredibly good when she is fighting inferior opposition. I like fighters that have the ability to problem solve people who are superior than them. in multiple aspects. Maybe you wear them out with some cardio, with some pressure early, and you throw away the first round. 3-round fights are a little bit difficult for that because you don't necessarily want to throw away the first round. But how do you problem solve? How do you start to compute and analyze the data that's in front of you? Or are you just sort of screaming and grunting as you punch the air until you hopefully eventually hit something? And that's what the fight looked like. I'll be honest. If it didn't end in the first round, I was probably going to miss the second round and go get a beer. I don't like, and I don't like bad fighting. And it almost seems like I think Yana's a good athlete. I really do. I think she's good athleticism, and she could be very good. But if you bully, like if you're 100-0 and you beat up 100 eighth graders, that doesn't make you good. And if you're doing suboptimal shit because you're fighting suboptimal opposition, then it's going to be habituated. And I think she got exposed. I think if she fights anyone with decent takedown defense and some hands, she's going to get touched up.
I agree with everything you're both saying, and I'm going to give a counterpoint that doesn't disagree with anything you're saying, but I'm just going to highlight something else. Because for the same reason, actually, that Jason wanted to get up and get a beer if there was another round is the reason why I liked watching this fight. Because Yana Kunitskaya reminds me of the Bad News Bears.
Are we talking Tanner, like Tanner, the crazy second baseman from the Bad News Bears? Because I love that kid.
I mean, the whole team, right? Except the ending where they're good. That doesn't happen for Yana. I like the Bad News Bears even when they were bad, right? And she reminds me of that. I like that her style is all about overachieving. And what I mean by that is she's limited in her abilities, the way you both pointed out. She closes her eyes when she punches or gets hit. If you saw the replays where she's getting hit, normally like you get hit and you see them close their eyes after they get hit and like their face turns. She already had her eyes closed before the punch came, right?
Yeah.
So this is Yana Kunitskaya, right? She's not particularly good anywhere. She has obvious tells and gets really predictable. So unlike Poirier, where he's able to hide it or use it into his rhythm, she has these tells where she moves her hands kind of like she's jogging in place. And then the moment they stop moving, the punch is coming, right? So that's why Aldana was able to predict everything she was going to do, or when the attack was going to come, or when she was free to pot shot. And I think in a weird way, Kunitskaya knows that also. That's why she closes her eyes when she comes in, because she knows she might get hit anyway. Yet in spite of all that, she still manages to find some success in MMA. I'd even say she was winning this fight up until the KO, even though it was obvious to Todd, to Jason, and even to me that Aldana was the better fighter and she was eventually going to win. So you could have a situation where you could have one person winning the beginning of the fight, but you could tell they're going to eventually lose, right? And this is what was happening in this fight. Like, Kunitskaya can, on occasion, beat better fighters because of her volume, pace, aggression, and her willingness to use all of her tools. So all the things that messed her up in this fight that Todd actually brought up, that over-aggression, sometimes can work for her and help her beat people she shouldn't beat.
Yeah.
Aldana in this fight was just thinking punches, mostly on the counter. Kunitskaya, I think she's aware that she's limited and she's not great anywhere. So she's just going to do everything. She's going to spam punches, elbows, kicks, knees, clinch, takedown. And it's that variety that makes it hard for even people who are better than her to deal with her. But notice how I didn't mention any defense, right?
Because there was none.
Her variety is all offense. She has no defense, right?
Yeah.
I think if she can improve just that, maybe also her takedown somehow, she may never get a KO or may never stop anybody, but she'll win some decisions that way. I mean, she's already won decisions with what she has. If she can just add those things, she could beat people who are better. The moral of the story is just because you're better than your opponent doesn't mean you will win. And inversely, just because you're worse doesn't mean you can't beat a better opponent. So I guess this is less about Yana Kunitskaya and more of a inspirational story about people who compete. Maybe you're matched up against somebody you know who's better than you. But just because they're better than you doesn't mean that you can't win, because it's just about beating them that one time in this match. You don't have to fight 10 times, right?
No, all you gotta do is figure them out once. And didn't Aldana have an abysmal performance against Holly Holm? Was that the one? Am I remember that correctly?
Yeah, Holly Holm got on her bike and circled, and Aldana just did not know how to cut her off.
Yeah. So I remember that fight, and I don't mean to be disrespectful to either fighter. And I like Irene Aldana as a puncher; she's good. The reason I was considering getting a beer was because I almost guaranteed that Yana was getting knocked out. I knew that was coming.
Yeah.
Or because she is so offensive, she was going to win with spammy bullshit, which would have been worse for me mentally and emotionally, because I see that all the time. I've had fighters that I coach that would win 3 and 4 fights in a row doing wrong shit. And how do you break them out of that if they're winning? But like, you're developing a skill set, and you want to develop optimally. Doing suboptimal shit and winning can habituate yourself, or just give you this false sense of what is good. And, well, all you do is hate on my stuff. Like, no, it's bad stuff that any top tenor would exploit. Well, I never said I wanted to be world class. This is one of my fighters. Like, I never said I wanted to be world class. Like, then what are we doing here? If we're not working for that. So you get world class by beating world class people, and you beat world class people by doing world class things. I didn't see world class things from Kunitskaya, and they had a ranked top 10, and that sort of made me a little uncomfortable. It bothered me. It fucking made me mad.
Yeah, there's a couple of decisions she won where even those, like, she shouldn't have won, but the optics, I think, is what won her the fight. I think if you actually tabulated everything, even forgetting about damage and just even went by the stats that don't consider damage, she still didn't even outland her opponents or do anything. But just that aggression and just constantly showing something, doing something, right? You know, sometimes that could hypnotize the judges.
Oh, absolutely.
It's just like an argument. You know, majority of the time you'll beat somebody in an argument if you have the better argument, but sometimes you could beat them by just being a better troll, you know? And I think there's an analog to that, to MMA fighting. And I'm sure if you're a serious coach, you don't like fighters to win by being a troll, but you know, even the term spam, right? That's from trolling, right? So some of that online spam shitpost culture has made its way into MMA, and, you know, make a little niche out of it.
Well, I think one might have influenced the other, and then the other influenced the other back. And it's just this Krebs cycle of assholishness that won't go away. It's just going to be with us for a while. But I want to say this about Yana real quick, and this is my hubris here. I think if I had her for 4 months, I think I could really, especially defensively, I can iron out some of those wrinkles where she's just closing her eyes and wailing. That's if she's coachable, and if, like, obviously, if there's no, like, peripheral vision problems, no detached retina, but closing your eyes in the pocket. One thing I think I do well is via a specific set of drills and training style. My pedagogical approach is to have them develop that visual acuity, especially in close. I think I do it as well as anybody, and I think that, like, with her offense, if she had just a modicum of defense, then, like, those fights that we're saying are maybe questionable decisions that she's winning because she's just, like, launching an ungodly amount of randomness. maybe we dial it in a little bit, add a why to what she's doing, and then I think that, you know, maybe you have a legit top tenor there.
I need to come train with you, Jason. While I was watching the fight, she reminded me of me when I'm doing Muay Thai, because I have, like, little tricks that I do, but it's never, you know, it's never like establishing a jab, you know, countering what they're doing. It's just like, I know a few tricks, I'm going to do the few tricks, and it works against the intermediate striker, but it doesn't work against anybody that's advanced. And, you know, once they kind of realize that I'm not as good as, you know, my first few tricks, then they just bully me and beat the hell out of me.
Well, your own recognition of that deficit is incredibly valuable. It really is. People want to, especially fighters, they want to live lives of self-deceit. They win doing suboptimal shit, and then they just act like it's bad stuff. You got to know it. You got to watch your own Instagram shit. You got to know it's not great, right? You see it with like fighters who are 3 or 4 fights deep in their pro career. If your opponent's winning percentage is .300 or less, let's calm down on the 3-0 talk. Like, yeah, you're winning, but what are you doing, and who are you beating, and what is the development? I used to have this little cutback that I hit in high school, and I started hitting it. There's like some call it a bump and roll. I got a whizzer, and you kind of roll underneath. You see Bendy Casimir hit a knee bar out of it. I used to just throw people to their back for 5, and I was really good. It was a trick. I wouldn't defend the takedown and let you bring my leg up. I'd put my leg in between yours, and I'd just bump underneath, and I'd roll you to your back and tilt you for 5 until you took that away from me, and then I'd be down 2-0. That's a 7-point swing. Hey, how about you learn a better sprawl? You learn to square your hips, heavy pressure, get better at the front headlock position, because you're not hitting that shit in college. You're not hitting it at the high school level. But I won my first 9 matches in high school as a freshman, starting varsity, till I ran into a kid my 10th match who beat me like, I think, 19-12. I think he must have thrown me 8 times. It would have been nice to have a little more fundamental prowess rather than just the funk. And maybe I closed that gap a little bit.
A note to our loyal listeners: if you love the show, please support us and help us get paid for our labor by joining Team Southpaw on Patreon. By becoming a member, you'll get access to bonus content like exclusive articles, fight previews, bonus episodes, transcripts of fight studies, and access to our private chat group on Discord. But more importantly, you will help us supplement the cost of the show, the incredible time and energy Sam and I put into making the show, and you'll be giving us some breathing room not only to juggle Southpaw with our day jobs, but also expand Southpaw into other areas. Show your Southpaw solidarity by supporting us at patreon.com/southpawpod.
Actually, the next fight builds into this conversation because it is the bantamweight bout between Sean O'Malley versus Chris Matino. I think the only person who complained about that stoppage in the 3rd round was Joe Rogan. Otherwise, I saw no other controversy. In fact, if it were boxing and that many punches had landed, not only would a towel already have been thrown in, but also the ref would have already stopped it. MMA, it should take even less damage to stop a fight because the gloves are smaller and people tend to headhunt more. Jason, what are your thoughts about this fight? And then connecting to our previous conversation about fighters, to give you some background, Chris Matino started amateur MMA in 2013. He started fighting as a pro in 2016. So what were your thoughts about this fight?
Well, my first thoughts were, to fight Sean O'Malley, you're going to bring a guy who's 2-2 in his last 4 fights with 2 stoppage losses. That's what you're going to do?
Yeah.
Who the fuck are you catering to? The first thing I thought of, I don't know if you guys watch Combate Global, but they got a bantamweight named David Martinez. First thing I thought was, I think David Martinez beats the shit out of Sean O'Malley. I do.
I think there were fighters also in the UFC who said they would take the fight, and then it ended up being this guy.
Yeah. Yep. So they searched for an opponent for Sean O'Malley, an opponent, not opposition, an opponent. I'm talking about the cab drivers you try to find for the developing boxers' first 15 fights. That's the kind of shit they were doing. The guy's coming off 2 knockout losses in his last 4 knockouts, or TKOs, excuse me. But I have a problem when you bring guys up to the biggest stage that are 2-2 in their last 4. And O'Malley's a talented fighter, but you brought in a guy to lose. And aren't we a little bit past that in Sean O'Malley's career? Like, come on now. Hey, who are you fooling? And so I watched it, and I just kept getting more and more disgusted. And as I got more and more disgusted, I started Googling David Martinez or YouTube and David Martinez's fights. Again, this is a plug to Combate Global. They got some good smaller fighters, especially at bantamweight. And I thought Campbell McLaren doesn't want to give up any of his guys to the UFC, but I think the narrative from Campbell McLaren should be, I've got better fighters than you, because they do. You got some tough kids. I think Martinez is like from California of Mexican descent. But you got some of these guys got hands, you got good chins, good cardio. They can make reads.
Oh yeah, Combate is good.
They do. They look like established stand-up fighters who are just with it is just aggression and randomness. And to Matino's credit, he can take a punch. But coming off 2 knockout losses in the last 2 years, I don't think he should have. I really don't. I don't have any problem with the stoppage either. I'm like you. I heard the argument, if you're going to let him take that kind of beating that long, just let him finish the last 30 seconds. But the UFC has a narrative, and trust me. I mean, I'm not going to be a conspiracy theorist, but if you think, was it Herb Dean was the ref, right?
Yeah.
Herb's a company guy. He gets shit on every once in a while from Dana, but he's a company guy, even though he doesn't work for him. But he knows what the narrative's supposed to be. If O'Malley can't finish a guy that's 2-2 in his last 4, it's been put out with relative ease, then that speaks to really how much of a stalwart, how much of a juggernaut is this O'Malley kid. So they let the kid take some punishment. It could have been stopped earlier, but it wasn't. The argument from many is that then you should let the kid go out in a shield. Maybe, but they wanted a stoppage for their narrative, and it's just funny how they found a way to make it happen. I apologize to Herb if it sounds like I'm saying that he's in on the hustle, but I fucking think they all are.
So it sounds like you're saying that if it really was about accumulated damage, it actually should have been stopped earlier.
Yes, but at that point they got their money's worth. I'm not of the mindset to say, well, there's only 27 seconds left. That 27 seconds can cause the kid permanent damage. So I'm too old and I've been too injured over the course of my life to ever pull that just bleed, fighters fight bullshit. I'm just past it. Fighters also have to pay bills. They also have families that care about them. They also have children, their fathers, their husbands. Yeah, fighters fight, but if that's all that an individual is identified as, well, no wonder they get treated like fucking livestock.
So the UFC is going to use this to say, look how much we care about the fighters. We stopped this fight. When in actuality, if that was the case, they would have stopped it earlier. So when they stopped it, it wasn't because they even cared about the fighters' health. They stopped it because they wanted a stoppage. That's basically what you're saying, right?
That is what I'm saying.
You're saying they're not the good guys.
They are not. They are not. Anyone that believes that, I got a bridge to say.
Yeah. If you want to know how bad UFC is, then you got to look at their new crypto.com deal, where it is like a record-setting sponsorship deal. So now all the fighters have to wear this not only on their shirts, but also on their actual fight shorts, and they get no payment. So it's actually worse than the Reebok deal. They get nothing.
Well, and the apparel looks like absolute shit. The Venom apparel looks bad. And then you get the little crypto thing. And I love Israel Adesanya. I love him. Like, the guy can fight. And he did that. I saw a tweet. And his picture. And he's falling.
It was a Photoshop thing.
Oh, that wasn't real?
No, it was. He was doing a real ad for crypto.com. But because you could tell he was wearing nothing underneath, and how they did it was like, no, we don't know what the shirt design will look like. We don't know what the shirt is going to look like at all. So we'll just like kind of do it in post-production and make it look nice. But then you see how crappy it looks when they actually came out with the official commercial. And it's so low tech. It looks like it was done with an app, right? One of those free apps.
It's so bad.
And so you see their technology, right? How bad it looks. And you're supposed to trust the technology of crypto.com when that commercial looks that bad.
Oh, yeah. It's awful. It's awful. It was embarrassing and awkward as shit. Todd, did you see it?
I saw the picture that Sam posted, and it made me laugh so much. Like, like, why not just wait a couple weeks and send him the shirt and then have him do the promo then? You don't need to rush things.
You don't.
Everybody thought it was a parody. So then they looked at the official UFC Instagram, Izzy's official Instagram, the UFC's Facebook page, and also crypto.com's page. And it was all there. It was the official commercial.
For me, Izzy's stock would have went up. I would have contributed 10 grand to a GoFundMe for Izzy if he wanted one, to not take a fucking cent of that blood money, to tell them to shove it up their ass. I'm sorry for swearing so much, by the way. This gets to be heated. Because Izzy walks to the beat of his own drum, man. He's an individual. Don't fall in line with that shit. I don't care how much they're paying you. Take a stand. Take a stand. Everyone's such, what do they call it? Careerism. Freaks of opportunism as well.
And also that means that he signed off on this without having any idea what they were going to actually put on him later, right? What they were going to do in post-production, which is also very unlike Izzy, but he's maybe at that point where he's just that kind of company man, or he's just like, I don't care. If you're going to pay me this much, you can Photoshop whatever you want.
Izzy's also the guy that throws his monster can over his shoulder every time he gets the chance. So, it's very surprising to see him
saying that he doesn't want to endorse just anything.
Yeah.
Good point. Good point.
Todd, what did you think about this fight with Sean O'Malley versus Chris Matino? And what did you also think about the stoppage?
It was very interesting to me. Chris Matino's just walking Sean O'Malley down, but not really landing anything. And Sean O'Malley's piecing him up the whole time, but walking backwards the whole time. Somebody that I was watching the fights with was asking me, is Sean O'Malley not as powerful as we thought before? Or is Chris Matino that tough? But it's hard to get, you could throw good power shots, backpedaling, but, we haven't really seen Sean O'Malley against, top 15 guys. So we don't really know where he is in the division. Everybody wants to see the Sugar Show, but where is he really in the division? They just kind of spoon fed him some guy, and the guy came out and performed pretty damn well. He wowed everybody with his toughness, and I think the stoppage actually did more good for Chris Matino than it did for Sean O'Malley, because now everybody,
gonna Google him.
Exactly. People are gonna want to see more of him, see how tough he is.
When I was tweeting about this fight, I said this pay-per-view debut by Chris Matino reminded me of the WWE pay-per-view debut of Mankind, which is Mick Foley.
Yeah.
And everybody was like, it's spot on, because Mick Foley became a legend by appearing in the WWE, and in his first pay-per-view and his next several, from the Boiler Room fight to Hell in a Cell, he got famous for getting his ass kicked, right? And just being tough and constantly getting up and being able to take punishment. And he became really famous. And I don't know how long that's going to last for Matino, but that's what this reminded me. I was like, as far as performance, using Jason's rubric of good fighting, knowing why, good fundamentals, all that, he failed. But in another rubric of toughness and that kind of Mankind car accident stuntman kind of performance, you were very impressed by this dude, just because it's not even just that he walked through punches. He also got rocked and dropped several times too. It's just that he kept getting back up. And unlike other fighters where if they get dropped and rocked, they are now easier to hurt later in the fight, it seems like he got harder and harder to hurt the more times he got dropped, which is not good. If you know anything about the brain shutting off is a mechanism to protect the brain.
Oh, yeah.
So the fact that his brain was not shutting off is actually saying that he's taking more damage and his brain is not working the way it's supposed to work. So it definitely reminded me of that kind of Mankind, Hell in the Cell, kind of like a hardcore match. And O'Malley was just styling on him. And I think part of the reason why he couldn't just get that one punch KO was because Matino was just walking towards him, if you really want to hurt somebody, you got to hit them as they're throwing their punch so that they're coming onto your punch with their head. So even if they don't have any defense, if they're just walking forward without throwing anything and they're actually still not overextending their face, you could actually take a lot of damage if you have a pretty sturdy chin.
You were present in that moment. You're sort of a walking zombie, though. You're not doing any damage to your opposition, but you're prepped and ready to get hit in the face.
Yeah.
And I think he was.
Yeah. The times that he did get rocked was when he was actually exchanging with O'Malley. And then that's when he got hurt because he was extending himself. And then I think after he got rocked, he stopped trying that because he realized that's when I get hurt. And I can't say he was trying to win. I mean, he was coming forward, but I was surprised at the lack of takedowns by either fighter. And I feel like if Matino really wanted to win, he should at least try to do some takedowns, but he didn't even try to do that. So it almost feels like he was going for a moral victory. And going back to some of the stuff we talked about with Tells, and actually what Jason talked about with this like arm swing, contralateral swing as he's coming forward. And every time his hand stopped, O'Malley knew he was about to throw a punch. So then O'Malley would beat him to the punch and just jab him or hit him or kick him. And it became just so predictable for O'Malley. So I will give O'Malley that, that he is able to tells.
Yeah, he's also very quick and he's precise and he does make some good reads. He can fight on the lead, he can fight on the counter. He's creative. He does have some intangibles. I don't mean to shit on him too much. I don't like hype trains and I don't like catering to a narrative. Marlon Vera was beating him up. I mean, no one talks about Marlon Vera. I think Cody Stamen steamrolls the Sugar Show. I think he does. I mean, how do you think he would do against an aged Jose Aldo at 35? He doesn't win that. Aldo wins that. So, like, yeah, maybe you're waiting for these guys to get older, but how many Matinos are you going to bring up until Aldo ages out? Fuck, guys. Come on. It's a tough sport. No more moral victories for the Matinos. Like, when I talked on the last show that we did together, Sam, that's what I mean about commoditizing fighters. You guys will you can pay me just by me being there. Just give me that opportunity. Is payment enough?
Tex Cobb. Remember Tex Cobb, the boxer?
Randall Tex Cobb. Yeah, I do. He's also in Raising Arizona.
Actually, no, he was a pretty prolific boxer as that guy that you paid to just get beat up sometimes. And he fought a lot like that. But he was still actually much better than a lot of MMA fighters as far as boxing goes.
Yeah.
But he had a pretty good acting career.
Yes, he did. I don't know if you ever saw his fight against the Eastern Assassin, Larry Holmes.
Mm-hmm.
Larry Holmes lit him up with that jab. I thought he was going to kill him. And I think that's a relatively good comparison between the Sean O'Malley fight and that. It's not all that dissimilar. With one fighter walking forward and eating a ton of punishment, the other fighter much quicker, much more accurate, much more polished. My problem is whenever you call it the ultimate proving ground and you bring in guys to lose. How is that the ultimate proving ground? I don't know if there's any junior high wrestlers that are going to keep me at 45 for beating them.
That is when it becomes kind of like a legitimate way to fix a fight, or like pro wrestling booking, where you don't tell one person to lose, but you book people that you know for sure will lose.
Yeah. And it's too dangerous of a sport. And there's too many good guys out there that deserve their shot. This should be a meritocracy. If you are good, that should be what gets you there. Not that you are not good enough to beat so-and-so, so that it allows you an opportunity to fight and not be a threat for victory. Like that's my concern.
Now, what did you both think about the lack of takedowns from O'Malley? Because I already talked about Matino not really even going for takedowns. But when O'Malley couldn't finish him, a lot of veterans at that point then, to preserve their own hands, actually, to not accidentally break your own hands sometimes, or to just end the fight, they will go for a takedown and look to submit them in some way or win by some kind of TKO on the ground. But O'Malley didn't go for one takedown either.
I really don't think Sean is much of a grappler. You know, maybe he's not as confident in his grappling skills or even his takedown skills to get the fight to the ground, especially against the guy coming in, you know, on 11 days notice, you know, who he really doesn't know. He knows he could outbox him, but, you know, can he out grapple him? If he goes for a takedown, is he going to get caught in a guillotine? So he's probably, erring on the side of caution there.
That's a good point. And maybe he doesn't work takedowns that much because he's sold into the UFC's style, right? The style they want you to have, which is all striking with small gloves, even though this is supposed to be MMA, not small gloves kickboxing.
Yeah, just bleed.
Right? Just bleed. That's all they want. They want small glove kickboxing. And then now fans are even getting mad when you kick too much. So basically you want bad boxing with small gloves. All right, man, let's just wait till wintertime and then pick fights in traffic. How about that? That's the same shit.
I was watching a fight. It was Zabit's last fight. And I was watching the fight with some people, they don't know much about MMA, but I'll still watch it with you. And, one guy was on his phone the whole time. And, after the fight, he goes, was 99% of that fight on the ground? We all said, yeah. And he goes, oh, yawn. I told him, if only there's a sport a lot like MMA that doesn't have the stupid grappling component, I'd be watching that.
Yet people don't like kickboxing either, or Muay Thai. So
it's bizarre. I don't understand the cognitive dissonance. I never will.
No, I think you said it. They want bad boxing. That's why the celebrity boxing, which is bad boxing, is doing better than really good boxers.
Yep. Yeah, that's what you see. Something that's easily replicated. Spammy, bad boxing where people are just slanging and banging or swanging and banging. That's what they want. And it's easy to replicate that. I know a lot of wrestlers that are just absolutely fearless and they can't punch for shit. I would imagine pitting them against each other in a cage and saying, hey, no takedowns, would be pretty fun to watch. But it wouldn't be good boxing. It really wouldn't. It wouldn't be good fighting, period. And be wild, overly aggressive, and that's what Dana wants, and that's why I hate his fucking guts.
Now, there's only one fight I want to talk about from the regular prelims, which is the featherweight fight between Ilia Topuria versus Ryan Hall, which ended in the first round by KO, as Topuria predicted. Todd, how did Topuria handle Hall's grappling? And did Topuria surprise you at all with his own grappling knowledge?
I don't think he didn't really surprise me. It was just somebody was going to do that to Hall eventually.
Oh, you thought that was coming?
Yeah.
Why did you think that was coming eventually?
Just, Ryan Hall does the same stuff every fight. He fights from the outside. He throws a lot of spammy kicks. He doesn't really engage with punching, and he doesn't clinch. He just goes for, his Imanharis and tries to jump guard, invert.
He skips a lot of steps.
Exactly. And, somebody along the line was going to do that to Ryan Hall, and it finally happened Saturday night. It was really cool to see how he dealt with Hall's inverted guard, kind of came around, popped him with a few shots, and then he was past the guard. Hall couldn't roll over in time before he was knocked out. It was pretty satisfying to see that, watching his style. You just kind of cringe every time. And eventually somebody was going to do that to him.
So kind of like what Jason was talking about, Ryan Hall presented this problem, but it wasn't a problem that was evolving. So because it was a static problem, that was the same problem over and over, you're saying it was only a matter of time before somebody figured it out.
Exactly.
And Ryan Hall, he hasn't fought in a while. So the last time we heard about him was his statements about Hitler. So if you want to look that up, you could just look up Ryan Hall and Hitler. The reason why the host took it so well, and he said it on this podcast, was because it is a free speech type of podcast where they're all about that. So
if you tell me Hitler was a great artist, or at least an underrated artist, I immediately think Nazi, not art critic, right?
Well, Jason, tell me what you thought about this fight, actually. And did you have similar ideas like Todd, where eventually somebody was going to figure Ryan Hall out?
I thought that. I mean, you guys have probably picked up on my philosophy in fighting. I love innovators. I think my approach to training, strength and conditioning, and skill acquisition is very innovative. But there are also some staples that you need to adhere to. And how's the saying go? You learn the rules before you break them, and you can start adapting those fundamentals or those tangential skills married to your fundamentals once you've acquired them and have a strong understanding of them. Obviously, he has a great understanding of jiu-jitsu, but jiu-jitsu is not MMA. Anyone that tells you differently is wrong. Anyone that says jiu-jitsu wins fights is wrong. Fighting wins fights. If you say wrestling wins fights, well then tell me that if you don't throw any punches or kicks to set that up. Work solely with that skill set more than fighting wins fights. He took a singular skill set about as far as you could possibly take it in the UFC with some really, really impressive wins. But other than the occasional wheel kick that he was able to land, which he finds a home for it, don't get me wrong, his striking, no one should call it good. It's got some merits, and he's able to do some things because people are so afraid of his jiu-jitsu, and he plays with that. But I think if he had better technical striking, even if that round finished and there wasn't any damage from the ground and pound, throwing yourself flopping around on the ground doesn't look good to any judge. It doesn't, unless you're Imanari himself, maybe. So, and I had a feeling. I think I texted you this Ilia Topuria kid, Hasley Goods, and is likely the future of 145 pounds. I watched his last fight, and that left hook to the body. He ended up throwing like a left hook to Ryan Hall's ass when he tried to spin, like he tried to roll, get outside that shoulder, hit that Imanari roll, and he just sort of like stopped his movement, sort of like teeping a guy who's hitting a spinning back kick, it's teeping him right in the butt, and he sort of stopped his momentum, and then was able to kind of flatten him to his shoulder a bit and then land some ground and pound. I don't think this was a great fight that showcased Ilia's physical tools as much as his fight IQ and positional awareness. And those are intangibles that someone who has his physicality, because Ilia can wrestle. He's really good at jiu-jitsu too, and he's in his like early 20s. This guy is going to be a handful. He has a left hook to the body and a chopping overhand right, and he looks like a Spanish Georgian version of Canelo Alvarez, in tight, hitting short shots with traditionally longer strikes. This guy can wrestle as well. So you see someone who marries the different skill sets as well as anyone I've seen in their early 20s against someone who has ridiculous mastery of one. And the problem is, I think Hall's expertise bias. You start to think, because you win fights this way, that it is the best way to win fights. It isn't. It isn't. And yes, it's worked for him, and everything works till it doesn't. I tell you what, take a $2,000 OLED TV and move it without any packing, without the styrofoam, lay it flat on its face, you get it to the new location, and plug it in, turn it on, everything's fine. But 2, 3, 4 times out of that 10, you're going to have some dead bars, right? You're going to have some color and adjustment problems. You're going to screw it up. When 10 out of 10 times, you throw some fucking styrofoam in there and you get it to where it needs to be by following a fundamentally sound approach rather than what becomes a high-risk approach. But it's good for his jiu-jitsu school to show that he's got that skill set. It carried him pretty far. I don't really think his wins over BJ Penn and Gray Maynard mean much to me. I mean, those guys are about 700 combined. So you throw him in there against a kid like Ilia Topuria, who is going to be, he's next level, and you get what you got. You get what you got. Him getting pounded out.
So with this fight, you'll barely hear DC or Anik talk, but you ended up missing a lot by just listening to Rogan, especially about what Topuria was doing. Topuria, from what I understand, and Jason already mentioned this, is a BJJ phenom who also has good wrestling and who came up during our current leg lock era in submission grappling. So unlike Hall, who was the one doing a lot of leg locks in his era, Topuria came up when everyone was doing leg locks. There's actually a 12-year age gap between Hall and Topuria. So Hall is being talked about, especially by Rogan, as this innovator as this new cutting edge style of grappling, but actually Hall's heyday and era is actually a long time ago. So when Hall was coming in with his Imanari rolls, Topuria treated them like what they are, single leg entries. It just happens to be single legs that are upside down. And as Hall level changed, Topuria level changed. Then when he was able to stuff Hall from grabbing his leg, Topuria began to pass Ryan Hall's guard with a mix of Toriando passes and leg drag passes. So Rogan made it seem like Topuria was just escaping, when in actuality, Topuria was attacking and passing. Even if scored from a BJJ perspective or by BJJ rules, Topuria was up on points and advantages. So Topuria was actually out grappling Ryan Hall. Also, all the body shots worked to counter Hall's level change, because he would throw to the body and it would either hit Hall to the body, or as Jason mentioned, sometimes to the ass, or it would hit Hall's face as he was dropping down. And it was paying dividends. Topuria is all around well-rounded, whereas during Hall's time off, Hall seemed to have only worked on new Imanari entries, which Topuria stuff all the same way. And as far as actual heel hooks, Hall has been fighting as a pro since 2006. He has heel hooks in submission grappling and in exhibitions, but in pro MMA fights, he only has 2 heel hooks in a 15-year career. One to an unknown MMA fighter named Ryan Hogans in UCL, and one to a washed BJ Penn who was 1-7-1 going into that fight. This is just to give you a little grain of salt to Joe Rogan's hype about Ryan Hall.
Yeah, I think that fits into what I was saying about his victory over BJ Penn means nothing to me. It really doesn't.
Now let me end with one question for both of you. Brad Tavares. He's been fighting as a pro since 2007. He's been in the UFC since 2010. He's 19-6. He's only 33 years old, which isn't that old for a middleweight. He just beat Omari Akhmedov in the early prelims and is nearly impossible to take down. What does he need to do to break into the top 10 and possibly even the top 5 as far as improvements he needs to make?
Brad Tavares just needs to fight how the UFC wants him to fight. He needs to show some highlight reel finishes, probably get some performance bonuses under his belt, because that's what, the UFC wants, and that's what the casual fan wants to see. Tavares is very calculated. He wasn't really biting on Akhmedov's feints. He was showing really good head movement, and he was also getting those leg kicks in, which even made Akhmedov fall. So, maybe throwing a little more of those in the first round as opposed to the second and third. Akhmedov was trying to get to land the big shot the whole time, and Tavares was, countering and picking his shots, but he could have been a little more aggressive and tried to go for the finish. I had the first round going for Akhmedov, but the second and third I had going for Tavares.
Well, I think first we need to recognize what he has done, right? He only fought twice in 2021, not at all in 2019, or not at all in 2020, once in 2019. So he's taken some time off. He lost by head kick KO against Edmund Shabazian. And he got roughed up by Izzy before then. So, late 2018 or mid 2018, late 2019 was a little bit tough for him coming off those 2 losses. So I'm not sure if he had some injuries or what he let heal up, but you can get sort of a physical resurgence when you let your body heal, especially the brain. The central nervous system it's all, the mind-body connection is a real thing. I'm not making it up. So once you zap, and those guys over at Couture's train hard, and Tavares is notorious for sparring hard. And the central nervous system starts to get fatigued. It pretty much tells you to fuck off. I want to rest, and you push through, and you say, "Oh, there's no such thing as overtraining," because you watched Matt Hughes' fucking highlight video and you realize everything he said was wrong. So from a sport-specific training methodology, decide to give your body and your brain some time to
to restart, and he's looked better in 2021. So with a little bit of time off, I'd be interested to see. That Shabazian fight was pretty quick. I'd be interested to see how he does against him in a rematch. I would try to avenge that loss, and if you can do that, that would be my first focus. Try to get a rematch with Edmund. You get that, then your only 2 losses since 2015, besides Edmund, are Robert Whittaker, who Robert Whittaker is, Bobby Knuckles. He's number 2 ranked guy in the world. Then you got and Izzy, the number 1 ranked guy at 185 in the world. Now you start to have those conversations. If those are the only 2 guys beating you, and you avenge that Edmund fight, well, let's start talking about getting you in there with, I don't know, maybe Brunson, maybe some other guys that are ranked in the top 10, whose records are still a little spotty, and the matchup potentially favors him. I'd like to see him get 3 fights in a row. I think he's a streaky fighter. I think he's a fighter when he fights with confidence. He has a little more intelligence than I think he shows, because he just wants to beat the shit out of everybody. He wants to fight you. That's the thing. I almost think he's more concerned about just beating you up than even winning. And I think that catches up with him sometimes. He puts himself in harm's way. To what Todd said, yeah, you want to be fan friendly, but go back and watch Brad Tavares' fights. He has been fan friendly, and his record is 19-6 is still a solid record. But because he's willing to throw down and bang, he's got a few more KO losses than he probably should have. I think defensively he's underrated because he's so offensive that there's some obvious vulnerability there whenever you take those kinds of chances. I would some good strategic matchups that I don't have who is in the top 10 in front of me, but if he can stay off the ground, like Hermanson might be a decent fight for him. I mean, Hermanson is tough, but the last couple fights have put some wear and tear on him. I think now might be a time. You think you can stay claimed to that top 10 position, you might get him after he's looked vulnerable in the Shabazian fight, and Marvin Vettori was a barn burner. That had to age him. Those are the fights that I would try to look for. Some nice strategic matchups where the guy may be ranked higher, but he matches up better against.
I feel like, to your point, his defense is pretty good. His offense is pretty good. The thing that he's lacking, even in this fight, is that he has the defense to make his opponents miss, but then he doesn't make them pay when they miss. And I think that's necessary to get into the top 5.
I agree. Like I said, I call it ping pong before. You go, I go, you go, I go. And that is born of like sparring when you have 30 guys on the mat. You got to sort of watch where you are, so you don't want to get tangled up in the midst of strikes. But I don't know if you've ever listened to Jack Slack or read like his intro to striking manual, where he talks about the 3 initiatives. Leads, where I throw first, right? Delayed counters, that's I make you throw, I make you miss, I make you pay. So there's delayed counters, and there's simultaneous counters. And I alluded to that. I was talking about Poirier timing Connor's left hand. He saw Connor load up that left hand, and he just shifted his head to the outside of Connor's left, head off center, Connor's head still on center, and he split his. So they're both throwing, like a la Rocky 3. You can start to identify some good split punch opportunities for simultaneous counters when you start making reads. Sometimes guys are entirely too offensive that they don't make reads. It just becomes this rock'em sock'em robot. Like there are punches in between punches, but it's random and not recognized. So I think if he can establish that, I think he has it. I mean, I've watched this guy hit pads. I lived in Vegas. I trained at a Couture's for a while, and Tavares really does have the goods. He's strong. He's fast. He's always in pretty good shape. but he spars so hard. I wonder if it puts some miles on him a little bit prematurely. Maybe taking that time off between 2019 and 2021 agreed with him.
I definitely also think if he were to mix in some takedowns, that would also be a nice addition, especially at middleweight, where there aren't that many wrestlers. So sometimes the guy who's willing to do a couple of takedowns can win fights there because it is so striking heavy.
Oh, yeah. And they love to throw hard. These are big, fast guys. And when they overcommit, I mean, I don't see any reason to engage a person with 4-ounce gloves who throws triple hooks, right hook, right hook, or left hook, right hook, left hook, and all to the head. Each time you're exposing your hips, you're squared up, but you've rotated shoulder through. The inability to get your foot back. I don't know why you wouldn't just lower your level and get one. I mean, I guess if you're chasing the 50 grand, I would think that a calculated decision to get underneath those every once in a while might keep you, one, from getting knocked out and dissuade them from throwing with such power and authority every exchange. There's some strategy to it. If not, I mean, I won't give the fans what they want. Shut up with that. Quit currying favor with your fucking oppressor. Like, stop that.
You shouldn't call him Uncle Dana?
Oh, because he always has everyone's best interest at heart. If my fighter's in there with a bigger, badder, better fighter and we can find a slick way to beat him that isn't fan-friendly, fuck the fans and fuck Dana White. It's about winning.
I feel like once he leaves, it's going to still be bad because after him, I feel like Hunter Campbell's going to take over and he's just as bad.
They've already embedded this culture in the psyche of the up-and-coming athletes. They've turned it into Lord of the Flies. Not like, hey, man, if you get what you're worth and I get what I'm worth, we can up our stock together. No, it's like, I'll fight for free. They throw in things like top of the food chain, apex predator. I mean, did you ever watch Willie Pep? Do you think that guy could bench press 145 pounds? But you couldn't touch him. You want to tell me that's boring and that's not fighting? How about guys who have never fought don't get to determine what is fighting and what isn't? You know who rarely fights? The fucking fans rarely fight. So I don't need their take on this just bleed bullshit. What they need to do is educate themselves or fuck off. But we've already lowered the bar so much that if you got someone in there with a significant ground game, like a beautiful ground game, but that is nuanced and technical, and they don't get it, they don't want to get it. Well, that's problematic. That means from a marketing perspective, you failed to inform the fans. And who's that on? Well, it should be on Dana, right? It should be on the UFC and the sport as a whole to kind of grow the sport itself. Remember Pride when they wouldn't even cheer out of respect? That's how it started. But this is where we've fallen. And that upsets me. The promoter shouldn't determine what is entertaining for the sole purpose of selling pay-per-views and commoditizing mediocre fighters. That's all they've done. They're easy to replicate. You can find a guy who's pissed and just throw him in there and say, fight. And that's it. And that's becoming their new business model. While they capitulate to the guys who've got a little bit of style or really stupid fucking hair and decide that's going to be their new superstar.
With that said, I actually miss the events with no live audience. Now, having the booze coming back,
Yeah, right. But I also think that the decisions, even though judging in MMA is notoriously just whacked, I think without the fans, it was better. It was an improvement because you didn't have like the fans cheering for like their favorite white guy over the out of town foreigner, and the judges hearing every punch that missed, the fans going crazy for it. The human condition, without the ability to have instant replay in front of you or the capability to rewind, you sort of go with the energy in the room if things are equal, all things being equal, and that's what you get. I tell my fighters, hey, man, if you want to fight a Renzo Gracie guy in New York on a Renzo Gracie heavy card, you better come correct, man, because you're not getting a fucking decision. So let's plan to dominate. Positionally. We got to be smart. None of this, ego, nothing. Don't do that. Don't do that. They're going to reward randomness for them. They're not going to do so for you because you're not going to have the cheers that's going to propel that energy. Basic human psychology combined with some corrupt nepotism as well.
Well, let's wrap this up. So I really appreciate both of you for coming on the show and giving your insights. Todd, where can people find you?
My Instagram is Loucura_YJJ. That's LOUCURA_YJJ. I also teach at Guardian Baltimore. You should check them out. It's a nonprofit for inner city youth kids in Baltimore to train jiu-jitsu for free. And they're on, I think, guardianbaltimore.org and also Instagram on Guardian Baltimore.
Todd, the Guardian Baltimore, that's outstanding. That's an outstanding thing, man. Kudos to you.
Thank you.
All right, I'll put all that in the show notes. And Jason, where can people find you?
I'm on Twitter at Jason Sargus. And basically all the social media platforms is just my name.
All right. Thanks, fellas. And I'll put all that in the show notes.
Now that's the show. If you enjoyed this episode and find this type of independent media worthwhile, please consider supporting the show on Patreon. We have a lot more episodes like this one in the works, but need your financial support to keep the show running. Even a few dollars a month goes a long way. No one does what we do, and it's all being funded by you, the listener. In return for supporting us, you'll gain access to lots of bonus content along with our private Discord chat. Even if you can't support us, there's a lot of free bonus content there as well. We also have an online store if you want to show your Southpaw solidarity by wearing our swag. You can find all pertinent links at southpawpod.com. And if you can't afford to support the show and still want to help, please leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen. This makes it easier for others to find us. And don't forget to share your favorite episodes or the podcast itself on social media. Tell your friends. Until next time, goodbye.
Southpaw. Hitting with the left. Southpaw. Sam. Paul. Southpaw. Southpaw.